Your Honor, she's just a worthless veteran who couldn't even keep a civilian job. My husband, Richard, sneered across the polished mahogany table of the courtroom, his expensive defense attorney nodding right alongside him like a paid cheerleader. They thought they had me completely backed into a corner. They thought because I had kept my mouth shut while Richard drained our joint savings and tried to strip away my military disability benefits, I was weak. Richard let out a quiet, arrogant laugh under his breath, leaning back in his tailored suit as he waited for the judge to rule in his favor and grant him full ownership of our home and our business. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at Richard. Instead, I stood up straight, smoothed down the lapels of my dark blazer, and turned my eyes directly toward the bench. Judge Harrison, do you remember me? My name is Sarah Brooks. I'm 38 years old, and before I became a target in my own marriage, I served 12 years in the United States Army as a logistics captain. The room went deathly cold. The smug smile froze on Richard's face, and his lawyer's pen stopped midair. Up on the bench, Judge Harrison froze, his wooden gavel hovering just inches above the desk. He slowly put his glasses down, stared across the silent room, and looked directly into my eyes. Then his jaw tightened, his eyes went wide, and he stood up. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has reached. To understand how I ended up standing in front of a judge while my own husband called me worthless, you have to go back 7 years. When I left active duty after 12 years of service, I had a decent lump sum of savings, a small service-connected disability rating, and a master's degree in logistics. That was when I met Richard. He was ambitious, charming, and desperate to launch his own commercial real estate development firm. He didn't have the startup capital, but I did. I poured over $200,000 of my hard-earned military savings into his fledgling company. I didn't just give him money, I built his operations from the ground up. I set up the supply chains, organized contractor schedules, and managed site logistics. For the first 3 years, I worked 16-hour days alongside him without taking a single paycheck, putting every dollar back into building the business. When the company finally turned a profit, Richard's attitude began to shift. He subtly persuaded me to step down from my official role, claiming I needed to rest and recover from my time in uniform. I thought he was being a caring husband. In reality, he was pushing me into the shadows. Slowly, he restructured the corporate equity, quietly removing my name from the ownership agreements while I wasn't looking. Soon, the man who once praised my military discipline started treating my service like an embarrassing flaw. If I mentioned my time in the Army, he'd laugh and call my disability benefits government handouts. He treated me less like a partner who built his empire, and more like an unpaid housekeeper. I kept quiet to keep the peace, believing that as long as our marriage survived, my sacrifices were worth it. I had no idea how wrong I was. The illusion completely shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening. Richard had left his work laptop open on the dining table, and a notification popped up that I couldn't ignore. It was an email from our company's chief financial officer, Evelyn, a woman I had personally hired 2 years prior. The message wasn't about property acquisitions. It was a confirmation for a luxury weekend getaway in St. Lucia, paid for directly out of our joint emergency reserve account. When I confronted Richard that night, he didn't even bother to deny it. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse, his eyes went cold. He told me straight to my face that he was tired of being married to a damaged former soldier, and that he deserved someone who fit his new high society lifestyle. 2 days later, while I was out visiting my sister, Richard had the locks changed on our house. Before I could even process what was happening, I was officially served with divorce papers. Richard was demanding full ownership of the marital home, the real estate company, and every asset we owned. His strategy was ruthless. His lawyers argued that I had contributed zero financial capital to the business. To make matters worse, they submitted formal requests to pull my private military medical history. They claimed that my service-connected PTSD made me mentally unstable and incapable of managing financial assets. They were trying to humiliate me, paint me as a burden, and push me into a fast, cheap settlement before I could realize what hit me. They thought a wounded veteran would break under the pressure, but they forgot one crucial detail. You don't survive 12 years in military logistics by panicking when you're ambushed. When you're ambushed in the field, you don't panic. You fall back, assess the terrain, and gather intelligence. That's exactly what I did. I moved into a small rented apartment, kept my mouth shut, and let Richard's lawyers believe their scare tactics were working. They thought I was sitting in the dark, crying over my broken marriage. In reality, I was working 16-hour days once again, but this time, I was hunting. My military logistics training had taught me one fundamental truth. Every operation leaves a digital footprint, no matter how carefully you try to hide it. Late into the night, I logged into corporate bank portals, reviewed tax filings, and cross-referenced property transfers I had legal access to. I matched building permit approvals with subcontractor payments, following the money dollar by dollar. What I found was incredible. Richard hadn't just ousted me from the business, he'd gotten sloppy and greedy. He had been quietly skimming corporate profits into offshore shell accounts to dodge taxes, and he had secretly used company funds to purchase land under his own private LLC. But his biggest mistake involved an old military construction contract we had secured during our second year. Because the deal required a service-disabled veteran owner to qualify, my name was still legally registered as the primary qualifier. While digging through those archived contract logs to prove my ownership, a completely unexpected name jumped out at me from my last overseas deployment in Iraq. My heart skipped a beat. It was a name I recognized instantly, a name that was about to completely blow Richard's arrogant legal trap wide open. That brings us right back to the moment the courtroom went dead silent. Judge Harrison stood up behind the bench, his towering presence completely silencing the room. Richard glanced at his attorney, whispering frantically, trying to figure out what was happening. His lawyer quickly cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may," the attorney stammered. "The opposition is clearly trying to distract from the facts of this property division with emotional outbursts." "Silence," Judge Harrison commanded, his voice echoing off the high plaster walls. He didn't even look at the attorney. Instead, he stepped out from behind the bench and walked down the steps toward the well of the court. "Captain Brooks," the judge said, his voice dropping into a tone of quiet, solemn respect. "October 2014, the supply route outside Fallujah." "Yes, sir," I replied, standing tall. "Logistics Convoy 7, we brought in the heavy armor support when your son's battalion was pinned down at the river crossing." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Richard's face drained of every drop of color. "My son, First Lieutenant David Harrison, came home alive because your unit refused to abandon that convoy," Judge Harrison said, staring directly at me with profound gratitude. He turned his eyes slowly toward Richard and his attorney, his posture hardening into pure iron. "And I sit here today listening to a man call you a worthless veteran in my courtroom?" Richard tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Your Honor, I didn't mean—" "You will speak when you are spoken to, Mr. Davis," the judge snapped, returning to his bench and slamming his gavel down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. "Counsel, I am ordering an immediate sworn accounting of every asset, every tax filing, and every corporate account tied to this business. We are going into an emergency in-chambers session, right now." What happened in chambers over the next 2 hours was a complete bloodbath for Richard. Judge Harrison brought in an independent court-appointed forensic auditor on the spot to examine his entire business history. As the auditor systematically dragged Richard's hidden accounts into the light, my month of late-night intelligence gathering paid off completely. I explained the certified military construction contracts, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard's company only qualified for its lucrative federal bids because of my service-disabled veteran status. I pointed out the offshore shell accounts, the hidden LLCs, and the fraudulent wire transfers he had made to hide marital assets right before filing for divorce. Richard's expensive attorney sat in absolute, defeated silence as Judge Harrison's anger grew with every revelation. When Richard tried to claim he simply made a clerical error during his sworn testimony, the judge cut him off instantly, reminding him that lying under oath carried severe criminal consequences. When we stepped back into the courtroom, the final ruling was swift and uncompromising. Judge Harrison awarded me 70% of the total real estate business portfolio, complete control of our primary residence, and full back pay for the years of unpaid logistics work I had invested into the company. To top it off, Richard was ordered to pay every single dollar of my legal fees and court costs out of his remaining share. The man who had tried to strip me of everything was left standing in a courtroom surrounded by the wreckage of his own greed. Richard's downfall was swift and public. With his financial records exposed, the IRS launched a full audit into his offshore accounts, forcing him to liquidate his personal luxury cars and remaining real estate holdings just to cover back taxes and legal penalties. His reputation in the business community was completely destroyed, and Evelyn, the CFO who helped him hide money, resigned before she could be caught in the fallout. As for me, I sold my share of the commercial real estate firm for a life-changing payout and moved to a quiet coastal town. But I didn't retire. Using those funds, I established a foundation dedicated to helping female veterans navigate financial abuse, secure business loans, and rebuild their lives after service. Standing in court that day taught me that true strength isn't about yelling or seeking revenge. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm when the storm hits. Richard thought he could call me a worthless veteran and break me, but in the end, he only showed the world who he truly was. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Comment below, and thank you for watching.